Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to a Watchman Newscast live stream yet again. We've got a lot to talk about today, folks. Needless to say, we always do, right? That seems to be the theme every time that we have a live stream here. We are going for a full hour till around 5 p.m. Eastern time. And reminder, I will take your questions for our Q&A session. We've already got a very active chat here. I'm seeing just on my laptop down the side, people from around the world are weighing in, chatting. We have someone from Israel I see right now. Shalom, welcome. I see Oregon. I see Kentucky. I see Oklahoma. We'll have Europe, Africa, Canada, Asia, and beyond by the time we are done today. Thousands will join us. It's a lot of fun, folks, to be with you on these live streams because, look, usually on the Watchman Newscast every day, we're coming to you at 10 to 12 minutes per day, sometimes a little bit longer, but there's not the interaction that we have on the live stream. So I love to hear Australia. I see right now. Welcome. So I love to hear input from all of you, especially because this week on the newscast, I left some questions for you. I wanted your take on Israel and Saudi Arabia, if there is indeed a peace treaty in the works. And folks, I don't think it's going to be something that happens tomorrow or next week. There's going to be some more give and take and a bunch of negotiation. A lot of things have to fall into place for that to happen, but it is certainly a possibility, and more we are hearing talk about it. So I asked yesterday on the newscast, what do you feel are the potential prophetic implications of a peace deal, of a normalization of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia? That was the big question that we had yesterday that we posed. So be sure to weigh in on that. I'd love to hear your take. And again, Q&A at the end of this live stream. So leave your questions here as well, and I'll do my best to get to them and answer them. Okay, today we're going to break down a few things, folks. Number one, some very interesting, is an understatement, comments yesterday, June 6th, by Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant. He pulled no punches. Let's just say that. And if you saw the title of this live stream, here it is. The title of today's live stream is Israel Threatens to Bomb Hezbollah, quote, into the Stone Age and warns of a coming northern war. Now, those were the words of Yoav Gallant, Israel's defense minister. Basically, if Hezbollah dares attack us or provoke us, we will bomb Hezbollah and, by extension, Lebanon into the Stone Age. Now, I want to get your thoughts on that. You might say, why Lebanon? Why not just Hezbollah? Well, Hezbollah uses southern Lebanon and the suburbs around Beirut and also the Bekaa Valley, all in Lebanon, as its base. That is, southern Lebanon in particular is essentially ruled by Hezbollah with an iron fist. And Israel, at the end of the day, holds Lebanon responsible, the central government in Lebanon, which is arguably weaker than Hezbollah. But nonetheless, Israel says, look, you are allowing Hezbollah to operate on Lebanese soil. So ultimately, Lebanese government, we hold you responsible for essentially harboring Hezbollah. I'd like to hear your take on that as well, because there will be, when this war comes, again, Lebanon will not be unscathed. It's impossible for Lebanon to be unscathed because, again, Hezbollah is there. That's their power base. And the not so small matter of Hezbollah intentionally placing its operatives, its foot soldiers, and its weapons, missile and rocket arsenals in civilian areas and intentionally using Lebanese women and children as human shields. So we're going to talk about that. Hey, bomb them into the Stone Age. Again, folks, I think Israeli officials are done mincing words. Not that they were in the first place, really, but we're at the stage now where the threats by Hezbollah, not only physically on the ground, but verbally, more bold threats and provocations from Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader, and others, and in particular the Iranian regime, remember, which is Hezbollah's patron. That's their daddy in Tehran. The threats are becoming so pronounced, not only on the ground, but again, verbally, that Israel is saying, basically, in layman's terms, we're not messing around. We will bomb you into the Stone Age. Very clear message to the Iranian regime and its proxies. And it comes as Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, was visiting northern Israel, where, of course, you're bordering southern Lebanon, Hezbollah's power base. We've called it the coming Great Northern War here on the newscast. More on that in a minute. But Gallant was there in the midst of this major Israeli military drill known as Firm Hand. We reported it, I think it was last week's newscast. We reported on it. And by the way, if you miss any of our newscast, folks, don't fret, because they're all here in our archives. Just go to the homepage here on our channel. Right under newscast, you will find each and every Watchman newscast. You can catch up on whatever you have missed, so do not worry. And while you're there, by the way, if you're here in a live stream, I assume you are a regular viewer of the Watchman newscast. These are kind of our special forces here on the live stream. But just in case you have not subscribed to the channel yet, hey, number one, it's completely free. And number two, we're posting practically every day here on the Watchman News channel on YouTube, certainly Monday through Friday, and a good amount of time on the weekend as well, depending on the news cycle. Bottom line, you don't want to miss any of our updates, because things are happening so fast, so furiously, at such a rapid clip in the world's most volatile and strategic region, the Middle East, that it's even tough for me to keep up. And I live and breathe this stuff, and I'm on the ground in Israel and the Middle East several times a year. And there's so much happening, folks, it makes your head spin. Trust me. So I say all that to say you don't want to miss our daily updates, because we're sharing the kind of information that you're just not hearing in the mainstream media. Surprise, surprise. But that's one of the reasons we do what we do. So be sure to subscribe. We'd love to have you here with us, as we now have, wow, over 620,000 watchmen and women on the wall as subscribers to our channel for such a time as this. Only God could make that happen. And we are just so grateful to him and to all of you for joining us here. Okay. Gallant was yesterday on the ground in northern Israel, as I mentioned, when he made the Stone Age comments. He was there observing Firm Hand, that major Israeli military drill, which has involved every unit of the Israeli military, folks. I mean, every unit, including the cyber unit. They're all preparing. And number one, they've made very clear, we are preparing for a multi-front war that very well will kick off to Israel's north. Again, more on that in a minute. Secondly, Operation Firm Hand has been it's not an operation, I'm sorry. It's a military exercise, a 2-week exercise. I believe it ends at the end of this week or early next. Also practicing deep bombing runs. I wonder why they would do that. A deep bombing run, perhaps aimed at Iran's nuclear facilities, which lie over, I believe, 1,000 miles from Israel. And are spread out throughout the nation of Iran, which is a vast country. Remember, this is ancient Persia. Modern day Iran was known in Bible times as Persia. And I'd argue we're living in Bible times once again, by the way, prophetic times, but more on that coming up. But again, a vast, ancient Persia was vast. Modern day Iran is vast. And these nuclear facilities are spread out throughout the country, folks. And as we have reported here in the newscast, they are buried deep underground. They're hardened. They're fortified. These are hard targets. And that's why we've talked a bit recently about bunker busting bombs. Now, to our knowledge, Israel does not possess them. At least they don't possess bunker busting bombs as strong as what the United States possesses. Now, we reported recently that the U.S. was sending bunker-busting bombs to the region as a show of force to Iran. The problem with that is Iran doesn't take any threat from the Biden administration seriously. So Iran wasn't happy to have bunker-busting bombs in its backyard, but in the same breath, the Iranian regime says they're not really going to use them. So that's one thing. Secondly, some of these underground tunnels in Iran, in particular, near the Natanz nuclear reactor, the Iranians and some intelligence reports have said they are impenetrable to bunker busting bombs. Is that true? We don't know. But I say all that to say this is a hard target. I should say plural. These, the Iranian nuclear facilities, are hard targets spread throughout the country. It is not a situation, like I've said many times, like we saw in 1981 when Israel took out Saddam Hussein's nuclear reactor, the Osiris reactor in Iraq. It's not like 2007 when Israel eliminated Bashar al-Assad's nuclear reactor in Syria. The Iranian nuclear program is a different beast, quite literally. And Israel has been drilling on this and working on this and drawing up military strategic plans on this for years now, really. And it's gone into overdrive in particular over the last 2 years. And it's no surprise why, folks, because we have the Biden administration, which has made very clear that it wants a new nuclear deal with Iran. And although the Biden administration officials say all the right things about we will never allow a nuclear Iran, all options are on the table, in the same breath, they're saying, but we strongly believe that diplomacy is really the only way to go here. And by the way, we'd love to have a new deal with you, Iran, where we give you billions of dollars so you leave us alone and behave. It's called appeasement. So Iran sees that. They see that Iran and its proxies have attacked U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria some 80 times since January 2021, when Joe Biden took office. The United States has responded to those 80 attacks 3 times. So Iran sees that as well, and they say, look, we're in good standing here, and we don't have to worry about a U.S. attack. They're not going to do it. The problem with that from Iran, on Iran's end, is that Israel feels the same way, I believe. I don't think in their heart of hearts that Israeli leaders truly believe the Biden administration is going to support Israeli strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. I don't think the U.S. in that case, and I'm sad to say this as an American who loves my country, I'm sad to say I find it unlikely right now, at least, that the Biden administration would provide any kind of support, certainly not logistic or military support, for an Israeli strike against Iran's nuclear facilities. Now, I would hope at least verbal support if they're not going to, physically get involved and help Israel, because the U.S. obviously has a much more, Israel has a seriously powerful Air Force, advanced, but the U.S. has greater capabilities. It's a massive country. Israel is the size of the state of New Jersey. So the U.S. has greater capabilities. It has those bunker busters, as we mentioned a minute ago. You would hope and pray that the U.S., at least if it's not going to get involved physically, would at least support Israel to the hilt at the UN and elsewhere and verbally in the public arena. But folks, I don't think that's a given, to say the least, with this current administration. I believe Israel knows all of that. And that's why I believe 2 things. Number one, you see, obviously, this drill where Israel, once again, firm hand, this exercise, this 2-week exercise going on right now as I come to you, where Israel is working on deep bombing runs. Secondly, Israeli officials from Benjamin Netanyahu to Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, who I mentioned, to Herzi Halevi, who's the chief of staff for the Israel Defense Forces, and beyond. I mean, across the board, and even across the political spectrum in some cases, Israeli officials, thought leaders, former officials, current officials, they're all saying, if we have to act alone against Iran's nuclear facilities, we will do it. Who's that a message to? That's a clear message not only to Iran, but to the United States. And Israel, it feels it necessary to deliver that message to Iran because, frankly, folks, Iran sees daylight. The Iranian regime sees daylight between Israel and the United States, which is the last thing you want them to see. They saw it during the Obama administration when Prime Minister Netanyahu had to take the extraordinary step in 2015 of speaking before the U.S. Congress to implore the U.S. Congress, anyone in Washington, D.C., to block the Obama administration's proposed Iran nuclear deal. Now, sadly, the deal still went through, but certainly when you have the prime minister of your greatest ally in the Middle East on your soil opposing your policy, then there's daylight. And that's the last thing Bibi Netanyahu wanted to give off to Iran, of course, but desperate times call for desperate measures. And Netanyahu believed his last best chance to stop the Iran nuclear deal was to go around the Obama White House and speak directly to the U.S. Congress and to the American people. So daylight, all that said, daylight, and Iran saw this and said, they're not getting along. They don't see eye to eye. And when Iran sees that, they get excited. And so does China, so does Russia, so does others. But in particular, when it comes to the Israel-U.S. relationship, Iran gets excited. That's the word I would use. They're gleeful. They see daylight between the U.S. and Israel. They see kind of a loggerheads relationship. And they see, perhaps even more importantly in some cases, the internal divide within Israel right now, the continued demonstrations, the internal discord, and they're salivating. I don't know any other way to put it, folks. The Iranian regime says they're ripe for the picking. And I wish it wasn't so, but that's how they're looking at it. The good news is, and this was the other question we posed, right? On Monday, I posed this question to you all. If you missed it, comment here and we'll talk about it. Do you believe, when the rubber hits the road, so to speak, that Israelis will be able to put aside their internal differences, the political discord over judicial reform and all the rest? Will they be able to put that aside, unite, and come together against external threats? Chief among them, of course, Iran's nuclear program, Iran's proxies like Hezbollah, and that looming multi-front war. Will Israelis unite like they always have in years past whenever there has been an external threat? That was our first question that we posed on Monday. Yesterday, I posed another question, prophetic implications of a potential peace agreement, a normalization of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. What do you think? Because I'm trying to stifle a sneeze here, by the way. Live TV, a live stream, I should say, here on YouTube. But I digress. Weigh in. Do me a favor, as we have this very active chat right here, and weigh in. Let us know what you think. And our trusty producer, Daniel, just put the questions up there. So I think two pretty good and pretty relevant questions with massive, massive ramifications. And we have a very educated audience here on the Watchman. And that's why I love the live streams, because, man, some of your questions and your comments and your observations and most of the time coming from a biblical perspective where you have Holy Spirit discernment, I love it. So it's a pleasure for me. I see Northern Ireland joining us. Linda Olivier, that doesn't sound Irish. I'm half Irish myself, but welcome nonetheless. It's okay. This is very good. We've got a lot of people with us, thousands from around the world, and thousands more by the time we are done. So the situation we are in is Israel feels, I think in a sense that Israel feels that it has, I don't want to say it's back against the wall. I think Israel feels slightly isolated when it comes to the Iran nuclear issue. Certainly when it comes to the West. The United States and Europe have really telegraphed the fact that they have no stomach for a military confrontation of any sort with the Iranian regime. They want that deal. They want to revive that Iran nuclear deal in some form or fashion. Now, the Biden administration reportedly is saying, well, even if it's like a half version of that deal, where instead of maybe being 10 years, it's 3 years, and maybe Iran just promises for a limited time to stop enriching uranium or enrich uranium at lower levels, et cetera, et cetera. It's all bad. And it all ends up in the same place, appeasement of the Iranian regime and emboldening of the Iranian regime. So Israel, in that sense, they're pulling their hair out, folks. I can tell you, Israeli officials, I'm in Israel on a regular basis. I'm talking to them. And I think privately, not publicly, they're transmitting a very strong message like, hey, we'll do this alone if we need to. It's an existential threat. It's a grave threat to our existence. We're not going to allow a nation devoted to our destruction to acquire the weapons that would allow it to do exactly that. Folks, it's common sense. Unfortunately, we live in times where common sense is not so common. That's why privately, Israeli officials are pretty much pulling their hair out and saying, what are these people thinking when it comes to the current administration in Washington, D.C., when it comes to European leaders, when it comes to the so-called international community? The Israelis feel, I think, when it comes to the Iran nuclear program, on an island in some respects. Now, you could say, well, look, Israel has built new alliances. Amen. And we've documented that and highlighted that here in the newscast many times. In the Sunni Arab world in particular, of course, the Abraham Accords, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute with Saudi Arabia. Obviously, these nations don't want to see Iran acquire the bomb in their backyard. I'm talking Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Jordan, Egypt. And yet, it comes back to D.C. again, folks. I'm sorry to say, I'm not trying to bash D.C. all day, but it comes back to the current weak leadership in Washington, D.C. As we broke down on yesterday's newscast, the Saudis don't want to see a nuclear Iran, nor do the other Gulf nations. And yet, the ambassador, the Iranian ambassador to Saudi Arabia, just reopened the embassy yesterday in Saudi Arabia. You're saying, wait a minute. You're telling me the Saudis don't want to see a nuclear Iran, but now they have renewed relations with Iran? What gives? By the way, in a China broker deal back in March. What gives is real simple. The Saudis are doing this out of a position of weakness. It's really simple. And I don't want to say it's if you can't beat them, join them. It's not that, because the Saudis are not ideologically aligned with the Iranian regime. They don't share Iran's version of things. Wow, I see a father judge graduate from Northeast Philly commenting. Welcome, welcome. But hey, when I see a Philly person on the chat, folks, I got to give them a shout out. I'm sorry, especially Northeast Philly, my old stomping grounds. Okay, we'll move on. But the Saudis did this out of a position of weakness, in that they see weakness on their end in Washington, and they in turn felt weaker. What do I mean by that? If the United States, are Saudi Arabia's most powerful ally, does not have our back, and our relationship is kind of, I don't want to say it's in tatters, but it's tense, the Saudi-U.S. relationship right now. If that's the case, then that leaves us exposed to Iran, which lies just across the Persian Gulf. Not only that, Israel is the strong horse in the region. Israel is the only nation that has punched the Iranian regime and its proxies in the mouth, to use a Philly term, continuously. So a strong horse in that sense. But the Saudis say, yeah, but look at what's going on in Israel right now. There's weakness in America, in the leadership there, and America's a mess, crime wave. It's a mess. And I say that as someone, a patriot who loves this country. I hate to say it, but I'm a realist. The Saudis are looking at Israel and saying kind of the same thing. They're saying, look, Israel, there's thousands and thousands of people in the streets demonstrating. People are locking horns there internally as well. Will the Netanyahu government last? That's the kind of questions being asked in Riyadh right now as well. Add all that up, and the Saudis felt very exposed and vulnerable. So out of, again, there's no other way to see it, folks, out of a position of weakness, they were receptive to Iran's overtures to reestablish ties. And lo and behold, that's what happened in March in Beijing, brokered by China's communist regime. And there you have it. Again, key point here. That does not mean, see this, ladies and gentlemen, as a non-aggression pact. It's a non-aggression pact. I'm not going to compare it to the Hitler-Stalin pact in 1939, which was also a non-aggression pact. That blew up quite literally, and they ended up at war. It's not like that. But in a sense, in some ways, it's certainly not in some ways. It is, for the Saudis, from the Saudi perspective, it's a non-aggression pact. They don't want to be attacked by Iran and its proxies, bottom line. From the Iranian perspective, It's just another way for Iran to, in a time when Iran has been sanctioned and Iran is catching a lot of flack, deservedly so, for arming the Russian war machine with drones for the war in Ukraine, etc., for its nuclear program. So Iran is under international scrutiny. In a time like that, Iran has now normalized relations with one of the most powerful nations in the Middle East and the world's largest oil exporter. That looks good for Iran. From the Iranian regime's perspective, it gives them credibility, which is what they desperately want. Credibility in the eyes of the world. And not only that, Iran is trying to, and look, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei and other Iranian officials have said this continuously, folks. They're trying to kind of peel off other Muslim nations. They'd like to unite them all under the Iranian banner against Israel. So the Iranians are saying, you know, there's been all this talk in recent years of the Saudis joining the Abraham Accords and making peace with Israel. Well, let's kind of do the opposite. We're Israel's greatest enemy. Let's pull the Saudis into our orbit away from the Zionist entity, as Iran would call it. Now, when this deal was first announced, and I promise we'll talk about Hezbollah in a minute, but this is important, I believe. When this deal was first announced in March 2023, a lot of us were scratching our heads. Number one, it kind of seemingly came out of nowhere because Iran and Saudi Arabia had not had diplomatic relations in 7 years. But secondly, the first thought I had, and I'm sure many of you watching had, was, what happens to the Abraham Accords? Because the Saudis were widely expected to perhaps be the next Arab Muslim nation to sign on to the Accords and to normalize relations with Israel to the point. I spoke to a former Trump administration official last year who told me, look, off the record, he told me, look, you know, if we stayed in office beyond 2020, the Saudis would have signed on by now. You would have had this history-making, game-changing, history-changing peace agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, the birthplace of Islam, and obviously Islam's prophet Muhammad, and Mecca and Medina, the two holiest sites to Muslims, are located in Saudi Arabia. So for them to recognize Israel and normalize relations with Israel, obviously, folks, no matter what you think about Saudi Arabia, it would be a game changer. There's no denying that. And Iran wants to prevent that at all costs. So Iran put on a bit of a charm offensive, I suppose, behind the scenes. The Chinese got involved, and why wouldn't they? China is looking to flex its muscles globally and certainly in the Middle East, and they brokered the deal. And now we are where we are. But I said, okay, does this mean Israel-Saudi relations are kaput, basically? Not relations in general, but the possibility of any kind of agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Is that out the window now? And it was interesting. I talked to Israelis, Israeli analysts, and people in the know behind the scenes after that. And they said, no, actually, we still believe that although the Saudis have normalized relations with our greatest enemy, the Iranian regime, by the way, Iran has directly attacked Saudi Arabia, not only through the Houthis in Yemen, Iran's proxy in Yemen, which Iran has armed to the teeth with attack drones and rockets and missiles to bombard Saudi Arabia with, not to mention the UAE, but in September 2019, Iran attacked a Saudi oil field in a hybrid attack with missiles and drones. So Iran has directly attacked Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has never responded directly to Iran, yet now they signed this pact, non-aggression pact. You can see why I believe it was done from a position of weakness, because they see disarray in DC, and to a lesser extent, the Israeli government is solid, but in the streets, look, people not getting along in Israel over various issues, and they felt like they were alone on an island. And there you have it, the normalization of relations. Let's see if it lasts. If there's one thing we know about Iran's regime, it's that they're not honest brokers, needless to say, and they're not known to kind of keep up their end of the bargain, so to speak. So, and I think the Saudis very likely have their eyes wide open when it comes to this. And they know what the Iranian regime is all about. Again, it's kind of for the time being, don't attack us and we won't criticize you. It's a non-aggression pact struck out of a position of weakness. By the way, Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, is in Saudi Arabia through tomorrow, through June 8th. And at the top of the agenda is, look, all of a sudden, the Biden administration is gung-ho about the Abraham Accords, which obviously the Trump administration conceived during President Trump's time in office in 2020. It all came to fruition with the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, normalizing relations with Israel. The Biden administration has been really quiet the past 2 years plus on it, but now all of a sudden Blinken gave a speech on Monday in D.C. in which he said, we're all in on the Abraham Accords to the point where they're going to appoint a special envoy to the Abraham Accords. And he said at the top of the list is Saudi Arabia, that a peace between Saudi Arabia and Israel is in the U.S.'s national security interests, according to Secretary of State Antony Blinken. So he's in Saudi Arabia now, at the same time that the Saudis have announced that they are cutting oil production in the summertime. Very interesting timing. You know, the Biden administration has been harshly critical of the Saudis, and the Saudis now in instances like this are saying, okay, well, this is how we kind of clap back. Joe Biden went to Saudi Arabia last summer, and the Saudis still did not increase their oil and gas production. So much for that. But nonetheless, Blinken is there. Certainly he'll talk about the oil production, but Israel's at the top of the list, which brings us to the prophetic perspective here. And I know you're going to comment on this, folks. You're already commenting. I see the chat. Prophetically, what does it mean? I don't believe that this a deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia, this is not the 7-year peace treaty laid out in the book of Revelation. It's not that. Do the Saudis turn on Israel and end up attacking Israel? I don't believe they do. What I do believe is that, I don't know if there are any larger, massive implications. Well, there are, certainly, but does this deal, if there's a deal struck, and there may not be, it looks like momentum is building in that regard, but is it just a ripple where Israel, I don't want to say is lulled to sleep, but Israel says, hey, now we made peace with Saudi Arabia. Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, arguably the foremost influential and powerful Arab nations, have now made peace with us. Yeah, there's still Syria, of course, massive problem at our doorstep. There's still a Palestinian problem. But by and large, Israel could say, again, Egypt, the most populous Arab nation, Jordan, a very Western-friendly Arab nation with a powerful king who's close to the West, the UAE, an economic powerhouse, again, close to the West, and Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil exporter. Israel could sit back and say, we have normalization agreements, again, with the four most powerful Arab countries. One Israeli official told me behind the scenes in my last visit to Jerusalem that if we sign this deal with Saudi Arabia, the Arab-Israeli conflict is essentially over. What do you think of that, folks? I'd like to hear. He had a caveat. He said, not the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but the broader Israel-Arab conflict, the regional Israeli-Arab conflict is over if we sign a deal with Saudi Arabia. And it's with that line of thinking, there's no surprise why Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been talking continuously about normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia. So very interesting perspective there. In a prophetic sense, does it give Israel perhaps more of a, I don't want to say a false sense of security, but Israel says, hey, we've made peace with the four most powerful Arab nations. We're in a very strong standing right now where perhaps we don't have to be as concerned. It all brings me prophetically, folks, to Ezekiel 38 and 39. It seems we always come back there, right? The war of Gog and Magog. I've always thought of Saudi Arabia and the UAE as being among Sheba and Dedan, those nations named that protest the invasion of Israel, that latter days invasion, Russia, Iran, Turkey, and this coalition that comes against Israel in what Ezekiel calls the latter days, TTER, latter days of history. And Sheba and Dedan, I believe Saudi Arabia is among those nations, protest and says, why are you doing this to this invasion force? I personally don't see the Saudis turning viciously against Israel. Hey, folks, let me just offer this. I could be wrong. I'm not omniscient. Only God knows everything, the end from the beginning. But at this moment, I would find it unlikely that the Saudis would turn viciously against Israel. Yes, I know they have the normalization with Iran. But again, a key point, that was done out of a position of weakness. It was done out of a position of non-aggression pact type thinking. It wasn't done out of a position of, man, we're on board with the Iranian agenda. And that means we support Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Houthis. No, because those same forces threaten Saudi Arabia. And if anyone watching really thinks that the Iranians are suddenly fond of the Saudi royal family, you got another thing coming. Believe me, the Iranian regime would love to be considered the custodians of the two, of Mecca and Medina, and the true powerhouse, the leader of an Islamic caliphate. Now, different, obviously, ways of going about it. Saudi Arabia is obviously a Sunni powerhouse. Iran is a Shia powerhouse. So there's certainly some theological differences, and their apocalyptic views are certainly different with the Mahdi and everything else in terms of Iran. But at the end of the day, Iran wants to be seen as the leader of the Islamic world. And that's the bottom line. Saudi Arabia, by the same token, would also like to be seen as the leader of the Islamic world. So I don't see them converging. Saudi Arabia has too many economic interest in the West. Witness the merging just yesterday of the Saudi-owned LIV Golf with the PGA Golf Tour here in the United States. They were rivals. They even had litigation against each other. They have now merged. I'm not a big golf guy, a little bit of putt-putt mini golf with my wife and kids, but more of a basketball, baseball, football guy. But nonetheless, they made the deal. Shows you once again, Saudi Arabia's business and economic interest here in the West. So I find it unlikely at the moment. And again, anything can change. We could have new radicalized leadership out suddenly in Saudi Arabia. MBS is going, Mohammed bin Salman is going in the opposite direction. We're trying to slowly, gradually open up Saudi society to the chagrin of many of the hardline clerics in Saudi Arabia. But nonetheless, I find it unlikely that Saudi Arabia would suddenly throw in its lot under its current leadership, would suddenly throw in its lot with the Iranian regime and Hezbollah and attack Israel. I think there's too many differences there to bridge, my personal view right now. So prophetically, I think you see in Ezekiel 38 and 39, Sheba and Dedan protest. If the Saudis join the Abraham Accords, ultimately they normalize relations with Israel. You know, look at what's happened between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, Israel and Morocco over the past 2-3 years. I mean, the economic, the tourism, it's exploding, folks. And really, the ties are becoming closer and closer. These are warm pieces, so to speak. Not like Jordan and Egypt, which many have called cold pieces. Like there's normalization of agreements, but there's really no love lost, so to speak. The UAE and Morocco, Bahrain, it's been a different situation. And Saudi Arabia, with its economic might, if it got together with Israel, that could be a different boat as well, where there's reasonably warm relations. Now, many rank and file Saudi citizens would not be happy about it. Same deal, though, in the UAE, Morocco, and elsewhere. These are Muslim majority nations. And many on the ground will never recognize Israel's right to exist, sadly. But the governments are a different story. And Saudi Arabia sees certainly the potential economic benefits that will come from that relationship. All of that to say, I would find it, again, unlikely at the moment, for sure. Anything could happen in the future, but right now, under the current climate, I don't think the Saudis are lining up next to Iran, suddenly breaking a treaty with Israel and going all in against Israel. I don't see that right now. And I don't think we should get the Abraham Accords treaties mixed up with the 7-year treaty that the Antichrist will broker during the tribulation, during that 7-year period. I think these are two separate pieces. This is not that. That 7-year deal is coming, brokered by the man of sin. That's coming, the son of perdition, but it is not yet. But folks, the shifting sands, I called it yesterday, of the Middle East, and the prophetic chess pieces moving on the board, certainly. Before we get to questions, we talked about Hezbollah at the top. If you missed it, just kind of, I don't want to say rewind. What you can do is just go to the homepage under newscast. As soon as we're done here, you can catch the whole live stream if you are just joining us. By the way, another thing to mention is the Watchman merch. You might like the shirt. I have one right now, the Watchman with Erick Stakelbeck, ES. If you like the shirt and you would like to show your support for the channel, check out the new Watchman shop. You can just go to shop, there it is, shop.tbn.org/Watchman. We've got Watchman t-shirts, hoodies are coming. We've got some hats, mugs, some stickers you can put on your flasks and everything else in your windshield. Some cool stuff just in time for summer by popular demand. A lot of people over the past several months have been saying, hey, we want some Watchman merch. Your wish is our command. So we have that now. And it's a way to support, not only just support the channel in a physical sense and say, hey, love this show, but also you help keep us on the air, folks, quite frankly, because to have a very large YouTube channel, a very large international TV show that we have weekly on TBN, it's not free, unfortunately. I wish it was, but it's not. So your support is greatly appreciated. We can't thank you guys enough. But we thought the merch was a fun way to kind of get on board with you all and kind of do a collab, as they would say here on YouTube. Okay, with Hezbollah, the Stone Age comment by Yoav Gallant, an eye-opener. It's always interesting when leaders put it in such stark terms. In the U.S., obviously, former President Trump, when he talked about North Korea and others, he basically said, we'll wipe you off the map. We'll destroy you. I got to say, folks, dictators and tyrants and evil men seem to respond to that, and it seems to make them think twice in most cases. And it seems to keep them on their toes, and they seem a little bit unsure and say, wow, maybe these folks are just crazy enough to do it. We better kind of think twice. They're not feeling that right now, certainly with Joe Biden in D.C. or maybe other leadership in Israel. But the current leadership in Israel, I think Iran and its allies know that, okay, we can boast and we can taunt, but there's a little something in the back of our heads that's saying, what if? What if? Now, there's a good chance the Iranian regime could certainly misjudge, and that's an understatement. And I already think they've been doing that over the past few months. Clearly, they've been probing, which brings us to the multi-front war. Look, this great northern war, as we've called it here in the Watchmen, it is not going to be a limited affair. And Israel knows this very well. It's not going to be Israel one-on-one with Hamas in Gaza. It's not going to be Israel one-on-one with Hezbollah and Lebanon. No, it's going to be an all-encompassing, I call it the ring of fire that surrounds Israel on all sides, the Iranian-backed ring of fire, where Israel will be forced to go toe-to-toe with not only the Iranian regime, but Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza, with Hezbollah in Lebanon, with the various Iran-backed militias in Iraq and Syria, and with the Houthis further south in Yemen. Again, a ring of fire that surrounds Israel on all sides. But I've called this the Great Northern War, this next conflict, which I believe is a precursor to that war of Gog and Magog that Ezekiel talks about. I've called it the Great Northern War because I believe the bulk of the action, so to speak, and the trigger for it will likely begin up north, with Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, with Iran and Hezbollah in Syria. Syria, Lebanon, Israel's northern doorstep. That's where I believe this thing will be sparked. Now, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, they'll throw their hats in the ring. The Houthis in Yemen will very likely throw their hats in the ring as well. The militias in Iraq, you'll see missiles launched from Iran. It's going to be a broader regional war, and it's going to be nasty, folks, and no one wants to see it. Let's make that very clear. Israel doesn't want to see it. I believe certainly Iran and its proxies want to see it. Their end game is to wipe Israel off the map, and they're working diligently towards that end. So they want to see it. Israel doesn't want to see it. If Israel had its way, it would live in peace for the first time, really, a sustained peace since it was miraculously reborn as a nation in 1948. Unfortunately, Israel has not had that privilege since 1948, 75 years of its modern existence. Throughout those 75 years, Israel has faced challenges at all turns, internal, external. But I think Israelis know. And if you're watching this show right now, folks, I said earlier, common sense, and we said common sense is not so common. If you are watching this program right now, please explain to me how the situation to Israel's north is sustainable long term. What do I mean by that? Hezbollah has some 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at every inch of Israel. Israel is the size of the state of New Jersey. This is not sustainable. From an Israeli perspective, you have a mortal enemy perched on your northern border. And folks, I mean perched. I've been on that border many times, the Israel-Lebanon border. They are right there. I have stared, this is not an exaggeration. I have stared at Hezbollah operatives across the border, and they've stared back. You might say, oh, you're exaggerating. It didn't happen. Oh, really? Watch the Watchman program from July 2021, where we went underground into the Hezbollah terror tunnels along that very border with the Israel Defense Forces. Hezbollah operatives were on the Lebanon side taking pictures of us. That's how close they are. And the villages in that very beautiful countryside in southern Lebanon are dotted with Hezbollah operatives in the homes who actually store rockets and missiles in the homes in southern Lebanon, right across the border from Israel, and beautiful towns like Metula in northern Israel. Bottom line, Israel can't live under these conditions much longer. I don't know how much longer that is. Maybe it's 20 more years they can. I don't know if we have that long. I don't think we do until this thing breaks out. And a blind man could see that this is the inevitable outcome. There's no way Israel can live under these conditions with Hezbollah in this current state. And if you're Hezbollah in the Iranian regime, Hezbollah's master, there's no reason to continue to arm Hezbollah and build up your arsenal if you're not going to eventually use it. That's the intent. Eventually, they want to use these weapons to destroy Israel. I've read the book. I know it's not going to happen, but nonetheless, that's their intention. So what we have is a collision course. And we know how this ends. It's not going to be pretty. There is no diplomatic solution to the Hezbollah threat to Israel, because Hezbollah will never, and I mean never, give up its weapons. And in lieu of that, Israel is left with no choice. Eventually, it's going to have to deal with Hezbollah, and it ain't going to be pretty. And there's going to be civilian casualties on both sides. That's why it was interesting that Yoav Gallant said, Lebanon, you too will be blown into the Stone Age. Not all of Lebanon, and I have many Lebanese friends and who do not support Hezbollah, needless to say. But southern Lebanon, I mean, the Hezbollah strongholds like the Beirut suburbs, look, that's where Hezbollah is based, then that's where they're going to be hit. Man, tumultuous times, folks, because you know that battle's eventually coming between Israel and Hezbollah. You know it. Again, there's no diplomatic solution here, because Hezbollah refuses to disarm, refuses to back up from Israel's doorstep, and Iran certainly refuses to disarm and refuses to stop supporting Hezbollah. We know where this is going. I also know that God Almighty still sits on the throne. And when it comes to Israel, he neither slumbers nor sleeps. Take heart. You've read the outcome in Ezekiel, the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39. You've seen that God intervenes in a powerful way, and that this coalition that comes against Israel is vanquished. I believe in this great northern war, the outcome will be similar. And I really think that Israel will deal a decisive blow to Hezbollah and Hamas and eliminate them from being a persistent threat against the Jewish state. I really believe that Israel is going to say, you know what? We are going all in now, and we are going to just end this as a decisive, persistent thorn in our side, Hezbollah and Hamas. We are looking to severely, severely weaken them so they can't threaten us for a long, long time. I think that in that next war that's coming, I think that's what you're going to see. And perhaps the trigger for that war is a strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. Perhaps Israel, you would think, and we've posed this on previous newscasts, perhaps Israel will preemptively strike Hezbollah. Because when Israel strikes Iran's nuclear installations, that's Iran's opportunity to activate Hezbollah, which it's been storing in reserve all these years. Perhaps Israel says, we're not going to give you the opportunity, we're going to hit you first. Can Israel simultaneously strike Hezbollah and Iran's nuclear installations? I have no idea. I do know that there have been some very genius military strategies and operations carried out by the Israel Defense Forces over the years. I have a feeling we're going to see eventually. Okay, let's get to questions. A lot of content today, right? Interesting stuff. Okay. Someone named Cuz. A lot of people in Philly say, yo, Cuz, what's up? Cuz asks, does Israel have nukes? Israel does not publicly acknowledge that it has nuclear weapons. Never has, never will, but it's a pretty safe bet that Israel is a nuclear power. It's got the Dimona nuclear reactor in the Negev desert. So the answer is yes, although Israel will never publicly acknowledge that. Okay, let's see. Mechanic 350 asks, there was an article that said if Hezbollah were to start a war, that Israel would turn them back to the Stone Age. What do you interpret that to be, Eric? Well, I spent about 20 minutes talking about that very article already on the live stream. So I encourage you to go back to the beginning of the live stream and check that out. Henrik Grigor, he asked, why do superpowers not support Iran's people movement? Basically, and I'm glad you brought this up because that's a crucial distinction. When we talk about Iran, there's a big distinction, folks, between the Iranian regime and the Iranian people. The Iranian regime is wicked. It's diabolically evil. The Iranian people are the main victims of that wicked regime. And they've been in the streets, not as much recently, but back in September, massive demonstrations broke out against the regime after the death of Mahsa Amini, a young Iranian woman, at the hands of the Iranian regime's goons. And protests broke out, massive demonstrations, a true people's movement, as Henrik points out. The U.S., Europe offered lip service, but here's a dirty little secret, not so secret, Henrik. They'll only go so far in their criticism of the Iranian regime and their reprimands and their consequences to the Iranian regime. Why will they only go so far? Because ultimately, they don't want to completely burn that bridge with Iran, because ultimately, they want a new Iran nuclear deal. If they come out too forcefully against Iran, no matter how heinous the Iranian regime's behavior, Western powers are worried that, oh man, if we criticize them too much, then all hopes of an Iran nuclear deal are out the window. And Henrik, that's a dirty little secret, I'm sad to say. Okay. Will this be the start of the biblical war from the north? Patricia Kimball asks, yes, the prophets have said the war will come, the threat will come from the north. And yeah, the threat is coming from the north certainly today. Don't sleep on the south with Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and the Houthis, but the north is, again, as I said earlier, the major threat from Israel's perspective. Okay, let's see. Great questions here. Wow. Carl Thomas asks, will Israel provide natural gas to Europe? Carl, Israel already is. Israel signed a natural gas deal with the European Union last June, I believe. Israel has massive natural gas deposits off the Mediterranean coast. And yeah, they're going to be supplying that, a good chunk of that to Europe. That deal has already been forged. Okay, good question here from Ken Rush. Do you think Israel has some technical marvels that are undisclosed that may be used during a major future conflict? The question, Ken, the answer is yes. I think the Israelis have several things up their sleeves when it comes to Iran's nuclear program, the proxies, hitting Iran's nuclear installations. Absolutely, I think Israel probably has a pretty brilliant game plan for that. No idea what it is. No one does. But judging by past miraculous Israeli operations in many cases, I think they do. Think of the Entebbe raid, obviously, 1976. Think of even recently that Islamic Jihad against that operation a few weeks ago against Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza, where Israel kind of cut off the head of the snake and eliminated 5 top Islamic Jihad commanders in a surprise attack that Islamic Jihad was not ready for. And go back to 1967. We can go on and on, when Israel basically took out the Egyptian Air Force when they were on the ground in the morning having coffee, sitting outside their fighter jets. And effectively, the 6-day war was over on the first day. So, yeah, Israel is pretty ingenious when it comes to this kind of thing. Let's see. Rod O'Connor. Big question. Where will it all spark off? Rod asks. Israel, Russia, China, North Korea, America, elsewhere? I think Rod is saying, look, something big is coming. There's going to be there's wars and rumors of wars. Something big is coming. I think we all kind of sense that. We're not happy about it when it comes to the war. Something big coming in terms of Jesus returning. We're excited about that. But in terms of war and rumors of war and battles, and no one wants to see that. But by the same token, we're realistic here in the Watchmen, and we know these things are coming. And I think you'd rather know than not know, and that's why we have to report them to you as a newscast. Rod, great question. Russia, Ukraine, you could say let's take it one by one. Russia, Ukraine, already happening, right? It's already broken out. What would be a major escalation between Russia and Ukraine? Well, you could say, in one sense, there's been an escalation in that Iran has gotten involved on the Russian side. Obviously, the West is backing Ukraine. So it's become a proxy war, in a sense, in some ways. The major escalation, I hate to even verbalize this, but again, let's be realistic. A major escalation there would be if Russia resorted to using weapons of mass destruction, in particular, a battlefield tactical nuclear weapon. No one even likes to hear that. I certainly don't like to say it, but certainly Russian leaders have warned about this time and time again, that they are prepared to do just that if things go even more south for them in Ukraine. It's something we need to be aware of. I'm sad to say it is a possibility. I'm not saying it's imminent, anything like that. We pray it never, ever happens. But I don't think it would shock anyone watching if Russia went that route. And we pray that's not the case. But Rod, to answer your question, that's certainly something that would be a massive, massive event that would spark perhaps ripple effects. Let's take it to North Korea. Completely unpredictable. North Korea, look, could Kim Jong-un could wake up one day and lob missiles at South Korea. He just he's conducted how many tests this year? Intercontinental missiles of all varieties. He's claimed to have hypersonic missiles. North Korea, wild card, completely unpredictable. Certainly something could be sparked on the Korean Peninsula. Israel, we just outlined it today. It's a powder keg, multi-front war is coming. Lastly, China. I'll say this. If you're China, perhaps you had said, okay, we will move against Taiwan in 2027 or 2028. And then you're watching the United States right now, and you're watching Joe Biden, you're watching what unfolded in Afghanistan, you're watching Russia, et cetera. And if you're China, you're saying, you know what? We said 2027, 2028. Maybe we should revise that timeline and kind of move up our timeline to attack Taiwan while there is still someone in office who, needless to say, or as an understatement, isn't quite ready to handle a crisis. That's being very kind. Could China be thinking right now, oh, man, you don't know what's going to happen in November 2024. Maybe we should move sooner. So to answer your question, Rod, a lot of possibilities. Tough to say which would come first. I would think Israel, so a total powder keg, that situation with Iran. and Russia, Ukraine. I mean, that's going on now. So obviously that's at the top of the list to spiral out of control as well. I hate to leave you like that. We got to go. But folks, look, again, to encourage you, yes, there's wars and rumors of wars, but what did Jesus say in Matthew 24 in the Olivet Discourse? He was on the Mount of Olives, a place I love in Jerusalem, talking to the disciples. And he said, look, when you see all of this, look up. Look up. I'm not far behind. And God will protect. He will provide. But here's the key thing here. You got to give your life to him now, folks. And this is not the time to put it off and say, well, maybe when I graduate or maybe next year or when I get married or when I get a new job, then I'll follow Jesus. Man, I don't think you have that luxury to put it off another day. We've laid it out today. You know what's going on. Do you want to be in the middle of the madness that is coming? Or do you want to have a personal relationship with the King of the universe, the Lord Jesus? I think it's a decision we've all got to make, and it's weighing in the balance right now. So I would encourage everyone to not put that off another day. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Watchman Newscast live stream. Great question today. Great live stream. Until tomorrow, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching.